Professor Brandom, you are one of the most important and influential thinkers in the analytical philosophy. Your book, Making It Explicit, is translated in many languages and is object of discussion and debates in many universities of the world. Nonetheless, your philosophical interests are also addressed to the philosophers of the tradition like Leibniz, Kant, Hegel, and Heidegger. You have important relations with many European universities, like the Leipzig University, where we are, and where in this summer semester 2008, you are Leibniz professor, that is, like visiting professor. In Making It Explicit, you maintain that the task of the philosophy is to make explicit what in our practice remains implicit. This introduces the idea of expressive rationality. Can you explain better this argument?
Well, I think of us as essentially normative beings, that what sets us apart from the other animals is our capacity to commit ourselves, our worrying about whether we're entitled to those commitments, whether it's a cognitive commitment as to how things are or a practical commitment as to how things shall be. I think of us as discursive beings, and that means that our normativity is inferentially articulated. We're beings who engage in practices of giving and asking for reasons. And I think these two dimensions, the normative dimension and the rational dimension, are what set us apart from beings that can feel but can't think. And I think of logic and of philosophy as having the task of making explicit what's implicit in those normative and rational practices.
Another famous point of view of your foot is the concept of scorekeeping, which explains the way by which persons reach a shared point of view. The scorekeepings are a cognitive practice, and you inherit this concept from the philosophy of Wilfrid Sellars and from his idea of logical space of reasons. By scorekeeping are produced the beliefs and the certainties of a group in pragmatic and not ideological way, and this allows the person to have a common vision or shared point of view about their problems and about the world out there. Can you explain the role of this concept, and can you also explain why is it a pragmatic answer to the problem of the sociality?
Well, I think of what we do when we understand each other as a matter of our having to know what we've committed ourselves to by saying something or doing something, and thinking about what it would take to entitle us to those commitments. So what we keep score on in the metaphor are those commitments and entitlements. Each time we give a reason, each time we make a claim, what we're committed to and what we're entitled to changes. I think of the task of communication not as being exclusively a matter of coming to share opinions, but rather of navigating rationally between our different opinions, projects, plans, and so on. Understanding each other is, as when you and I speak now face to face, to be understood in I-thou terms, from which we build up a social structure, rather than in I-we terms, as is traditional, where we think, well, there's the community, and then there's me as an individual in the community related to it. Scorekeeping is something that's done on an I-you or an I-thou basis. When you and I understand each other, it doesn't demand that you and I agree in all of our positions. It means that you know what I'm committed to, that you keep track of what I am, according to you, entitled to, and vice versa. I think of language as a way of navigating between the different perspectives that individuals inevitably have because of their different interests, because of just the different trajectories we take through the world and the different information that we have. So I think of language and discourse not principally as a means of cooperation, though of course it is for that too, but simply as a matter of getting clear on what each other's commitments are.
By the scorekeeping, we obtain also the concept of the tenability of our statements. The statements are normally about the world around us. How can we grasp the non-inferential facts, and how can we bring them in our discursive practice, which are inferentially constituted? Is your thought about this problem a form of weak empiricism?
Well, if one's empiricism is weak enough, then I think everyone's an empiricist. That is, we can't know anything about the world around us without sensory experience of it. That's the weak empiricism, that's a necessary condition. But for me, the form of the conceptual is an inferential form. To be conceptually contentful is to be inferentially articulated. So the question for me, the question that you ask, for me becomes, how do reliable causal connections in the world come to be transferred into an inferentially usable form? And I think the answer is that we can, as sentient beings, reliably differentially respond to the world around us. And those reliable, responsive dispositions can be tracked inferentially. So I take you to be a reliable observer of red things because I'm prepared to infer from your claiming that something is red that it's red. That's a reliability inference. I'm taking the causal connection between you and red things and putting it into an inferential form where you're saying something, you're undertaking a commitment, gives me a reason to undertake a commitment. And in that way we come inferentially to track reliable connections in the world.
In your book, Tales of the Mid-Dead, you write, my interpretative claim here will be that the idealist thesis is Hegel's way of making the pragmatist thesis workable in the context of several other commitments and insights. My philosophical claim here will be that we actually have a lot to learn from this strategy about contemporary issues, contemporary semantic issues that we by no means see our way to the bottom of the otherwise. My question are, is it possible to conceive that the several figures in the phenomenology of mind are a kind of a big historical scorekeeping? Is it for you the history a comitative practice? Can the ordinary language of the pragmatist be compared with the idealistic language?
Well, I do think of the phenomenology as a large allegory, and that what it's an allegory for is a story about conceptual contents, about selves, and about the kinds of normative communities that we institute by our recognitive relations to one another. I think one of the principal lessons that we can learn from the phenomenology is indeed the lesson that the classical American pragmatists learned from it, and is what deeply binds together German idealism and American pragmatism and neo-pragmatism. And that is that we'll never understand our interaction with the world if we think in antecedent terms of what subjects are, say the way Descartes did, and what objects are, say the way contemporary natural science tells us they are, and somehow try to clamp those two together to understand subjects as able to know about objects and act on objects so understood. Hegel's recommendation, what was taken up by the pragmatists, was that we have to think about our interaction. We have to start with the transactions that we have with things, the skillful practical doings that we build on